You did read my mind. I knew what to forget otherwise. So we have the absolutely brilliant Emma Weir here with us today to do our afternoon keynote. I'm going to chair this meeting. Never chaired something before, other than showcasing, but that's different. So anything not from me, that would be all about me. That would be great because I would love to know how to improve that. But I am super grateful that we've got Emma here today. I have spoken with Emma before a few months back, and gave some amazing kind of insight into academy football and her role and what she does. I'm not going to do a massive introduction because I know that Emma will speak about that herself, so I don't want to basically spoil it because I've seen what's going to be there. If you do have any questions throughout the session, please pop them in the chat rather than on the mic. But at the end, we will have chance if you want to come on the mic to ask any questions. I can also obviously read them out at the end as well. So yeah, I'll pass over to Emma if you're sharing your slides. I know I've
Yeah,
kept it brief, but I feel like it's the best thing to do.
yeah, not a problem. I feel like even though it was brief, you naturally bigged me up a little bit too much there.
I'll
So let's
always,
hope this actually
I'll
goes
always do that
all
though.
right. Okay, if you can just let me know if everyone can see that.
Yep, we've got that perfect. So yeah,
Perfect.
floor is
So
yours.
thank you. Yeah, that was a nice brief introduction, but my name's Emma Weir. I am the head of Academy Performance Psychology at Aston Villa. Um, so when I spoke to Amelia, the brief was really quite broad, that I could pretty much take it in any direction that I wanted to. So what I've done for you guys is basically outline how we run our psychology department at Aston Villa. Um, so naturally, it's very football related. So if you guys aren't fully invested into football, I can already apologise for that. But there's loads of different concepts in here that you could take into your space of work, wherever that might be. And I've tried to frame it around, whether you're a trainee psychologist, whether you're a coach, whether you're just really interested in this kind of subject area. So hopefully there's something for everybody in here. But please don't be shy when it comes to asking questions. There's little reflection, obviously, as I'm a psychologist, there's little reflection opportunities throughout the session as well, for you to engage with the chat box. But then please make sure you're writing down any questions you have, so you don't forget them, and then we can get to them at the end of the session as well. So as a little bit of an introduction, I basically went the really long route around becoming a psychologist. I did the very natural thing of having no idea what I wanted to do when I went to university. So I decided to do sport and exercise science as my undergrad. Very quickly, because of my own personal circumstances, but because I really enjoyed the sports psychology module within that as well, I realised that that was the route that I wanted to go down. So I went and did my master's in psychology, followed by my master's in sport and exercise psychology. I then went down the BASES route of CPAR instead of BPS stage 2, which then has led me to becoming a HCPC registered sport and exercise psychologist. BPS versus BASES are your natural decisions as a sports psychologist. I personally really liked the BASES because it gave me the foundation knowledge of all the other disciplines within higher level sport. So performance sport, when you're dealing with a multidisciplinary team, I feel like it gave me a really nice foundation knowledge of all of those disciplines as well. So I've been at Aston Villa now for 5 seasons. This is my 5th season, so 4.5 years. Started off in the foundation phase, and naturally, as you can imagine, psychology looks very different in the foundation phase than it does with our under 21s. So started off as an assistant academy psychologist and then slowly worked my way up, and now head of academy performance psychology. So my journey as a psychologist, you're encouraged to create your own consultancy business when you first start out. It gives you a really interesting baseline of knowledge of how to create a business and how to connect with individual clients, how to grow your business, how to get clients and that kind of thing. So I do still run that, but I would say that was never really my passion. So working on my own, I very quickly found I wasn't passionate about that. I wanted to be involved within an environment, and hopefully this whole presentation really reflects on how I get involved in the environment as a psychologist rather than just being an independent consultant. I started off my psych journey within Loughborough. So my master's in sport and exercise psychology was at Loughborough. I was then hired back by Loughborough University to work with their performance teams. And that is how I ended up getting some really interesting individual consultations with different athletes there, as well as how I first got into Aston Villa. As I mentioned, I've been at Aston Villa now for 4.5 years, and in that I've managed to work with every single age group. So I feel like I've got a really in-depth and interesting background on the different stages that young people go through when it comes to their journey with psychology. And then finally, I've been a consultant with the FA. So I worked mainly with the para squads, so blind, deaf, cerebral palsy, power chair. And that was a really interesting experience for me. Very much the deep end. I'd never worked with para or disabled athletes before, but 100% would guarantee it if any of you get the opportunity to do so, because it's probably one of the most rewarding things you would ever do. And I definitely came out with some very interesting but really invaluable experiences from that kind of thing as well. So as head of performance psychology, what my role actually looks like. So I oversee the entire program, and our psychology program in this building is from under 9s all the way to under 21s. So I oversee the delivery of our staff that work mainly with our under 9s to under 16s. And I'm the lead psychologist when it comes to working with our players that are out on loan, with our under 21 squads and our under 18 squads as well. So for me, on a daily basis, that might look like a range of player one-to-ones, support on training days, support on match days, group workshops if we're doing something as a whole, unit-specific workshops if we're doing something a little bit more position-specific, multidisciplinary team or MDT meetings. So your multidisciplinary team includes your psychologist, your physio, your sports scientist, your nutritionist, your coach. So all of those minds in the same room. We'll have separate meetings about who our elite or our potential elite players are. And then we get involved with return to play support as well. So athletes coming back from long-term injuries. So question for you guys, first little bit of interaction. What would you say the psychological demands are on an academy football player in this country? So use the chat box function. Think of any age. So that might be an under 9 player coming into us as an academy footballer, or it might be an under 21 player. What are the psychological demands? Now, as you can tell, we've got a wide range of people in the room with the answers that we've been getting as well. Very holistic. Lots of talking about pressure, lots of talking about selection, release, creating relationships with MDTs, adversities, identity, attention, concentration, yes, balancing, dual careers, all of that kind of stuff. Injury, yeah, fantastic. Living away from home, yeah. Cool. So I'm glad you guys have started to think about that a little bit more. And I think what I really want to get across to you guys is all of those demands are really relevant to every single age group, but certain demands will peak at certain times depending on the age group or what's going on with that particular player. So if we think about our situation at Aston Villa, there's 2 psychologists working from under 9s to under 21s. For us to make sure that all the players are coping with all of those demands, is a hell of a lot of work for us to do, you know, 2 people versus 120 young athletes. So we need to be really smart and really prioritize the work that we do to make sure that we can make sure all of those players are getting supported with all of those demands. The really key thing for us to think about is we can't get rid of those demands for them, because that is unfortunately the reality of being involved in academy football or working towards being a professional footballer. But what we can do is make sure that when they come into our academy, we're helping them build the tools and use the tools to be able to cope with those demands a little bit better. So when they're ready to then leave us, they're leaving us in a better place. And when I say leave us, that might be to go into our first team. That might be to go out to another club, to go out on loan. It might be they get released when they're in the youth development phase, or they might then decide that a career in football is not for them. So as a psychology department, yes, we're performance focused and we're trying to develop footballers, but we're actually just trying to develop better human beings that are in a better place, no matter how they leave us or why they leave us. So what does psychology look like in academy football? We've got the player at the top, who is our number one priority at all times. So everything we do will be to create some kind of change within our players. However, what we try and do is work directly with the players, but also through the staff and through the environment as a whole. So hopefully what I'll do throughout this presentation is really outline how we try and do that. So how we try and deal with players face-to-face on a one-to-one basis, how we work through the staff to make changes with that player, but how we try and alter the environment around a player to support psychological development as well. So working through the player themselves, and apologies, this is quite a text-heavy slide, but I will talk through it as best I can. So within academy football, our players are split into age group phases. So we have the foundation phase, we have the youth development phase, the professional development phase, and then our players that are out on loan. Now, naturally, as you all know, as human beings, our brain is non-stop developing. So all of these players are at different stages of their cognitive development. So for us to try and create programs that help develop each individual player, we need to make it as individualized to each age group as we possibly can. Naturally, the player-facing work is a lot more intense the older the players get rather than the younger they are. So the younger the players are, we probably focus a little bit more, as I looked on the last slide, we probably focus a little bit more through the staff and through the environment to influence the players. Whereas when it comes to professional development phase and loan players, we probably do a lot more face-to-face and player-facing too. So within our foundation phase, so our under 9s to under 11s, we really try and focus on making things a little bit more fun. We use what's called the 5C framework. So if anyone's read Chris Harwood's work, a really fun and player safe way of talking about psychology, basically. So we now have under 9s that are okay talking about commitment because they know what it is and they're happy to talk about that psychological concept because they're talking about a really fun thing that they've learned, which is a really great way to engage young players. So we also give foundation phase players holiday program support. So when they're with us in half terms and we've got a little bit more contact time with them. We also use 5C profiling to be able to track their progress over time. And we're also involved in things like mid-season and end of season reports, a little bit like teachers with school reports and that kind of thing. So if you look to the bottom of the screen as well, what we're really trying to focus on within the foundation phase is helping them understand the program a little bit more. So it's all about having fun, but it's all about their baseline knowledge. So if we can get foundation phase players talking about psychology by the time they're in the youth development phase, we've got a really great foundation. We're also then thinking about the parent dynamics and how we deal with that. And the biggest thing that naturally we'll have to deal with in the foundation phase is emotional control, because there's tears all over the place, you know, their ability to control their emotions is really low. So naturally, that's something that we're there to help support with too. When we edge into youth development phase, so We're working again on the 5C framework because it's still really player friendly and it helps everyone, coaches, players have this common language. We then try and edge into a few more group workshops and maybe a couple of one-to-ones with real priority players as well. We edge into more performance profiling. So how can we now use the 5Cs to start influencing their psychological performance? We offer them transition support. So whether they might be transitioning out of our academy, they might be transitioning into full-time football when it comes to 15s and 16s. And again, we're involved with player reports. So if we're looking at our under 12s to 14s and our under 15s, 16s, we're thinking about retain and release. That 12 to 14 period is probably where we see the biggest cognitive changes. So we're really helping the players understand their new emotions and understand their new way of seeing the world and thinking about things. There's a big threat to ego at that age as well. When they're in the 15 to 16s, they're transitioning into first-time football for the first time. They're trying to balance school life, friends, all of that kind of thing with the thought of becoming a professional footballer. And they'll start edging towards having experiences within the professional development phase as well, which can be quite a daunting experience for them. When it comes to our professional development phase, so our under 18s to our under 21s, gets a lot more individualized for the player. So player one-to-ones, we might have unit-specific or position-specific workshops, performance profiling and analysis. So we're going really performance-focused to help this player perform at the best level they can. Return to play support, we probably might see a few more long-term injuries in this kind of phase. And again, player reports to make sure we keep tracking on everything that's going on. So the biggest things that we might see within professional development phase, so their transition to football as a career now. We get a lot of boys seeing football in a totally different way. So a lot of them might not be playing for football for fun anymore. It might be that career. So the motivational changes, the commitment changes, and the pressure that comes along with that. Host families. So I know someone in the chat mentioned that they then have to start living away from home. So yeah, everyone moves away. It's a totally different lifestyle for them, and football becomes your 24/7. And their understanding of self. So the reason I put this in here is because not many 17-year-olds in the world understand themselves fully. I am nowhere near 17 yet, nowhere near 17 anymore. And I can tell you my understanding of self is still developing. So we put these players under so much pressure when we put them into new environments. So when they get put with the first team or when they're going and playing adults football somewhere. So we really need to help them develop this sense of self so they can cope and they can thrive in that kind of environment. We've then got our loan players. So the loan support actually decreases a little bit just because they need to go out and experience what it is like at different clubs as well. And different clubs might have different levels of support. So we need to make it feel a little bit different for them. So they'll have one-to-one catch-ups. They'll still have the performance profiling, analysis, reflection, all of that side of things. And they'll always be able to reach out if they ever do need something extra. So it's not like they're out on loan, so we kind of ignore them for a little bit and hope to God that they can then cope with the demands that they're under. We will always be here to support them, but we do try and encourage that's how they can really develop those resilient skills and that kind of thing. So out on loan, you might expect them to be trying to adapt to different environments, coping with deselection because it's adults football now, and they have to really fight for their place. And that real sense of responsibility and ownership on them as well. So this is what stuff within our foundation phase might look like. So we try and make it as player friendly as possible. I've had loads of people talk to me about how appropriate it is to be talking about psychology to under nines. And to be honest, I just think it's how you're delivering it and the language that you use and how you're actually framing what psychology is. The best thing about delivering psychology to our under nines is that by the time there are under 18s in our building, they would have had so much psychological support and they've built up such a fantastic understanding of what psychology is and how it can help their well-being and performance, that what a fantastic foundation that is. So we try and make it as fun as possible. So on that picture on the right-hand side, they're working on their communication and things like that, and actually taking the mick out of their coach a little bit. So yes, it's psychology, but it's also thinking about things in a really creative and different way. We've then got our youth development phase. So as I mentioned, this goes from under 12 to under 16. So this is actually a really, really wide range of ages and cognitive abilities, which is a really interesting phase to be in. So it gets a little bit more serious. So we start to talk about psychological concepts and how they can really learn these and how they can really use them on the pitch and how they can affect your performance. So it's led by both the practitioner and the coach. There's lots of emphasis on the coach building the 5 C's within their training sessions and becoming a psychologist themselves. They get lots of support when they come out to us through school release, loads of different workshops to try and get them thinking in different ways. What we really want to ensure is that psychology isn't something that they just do when they come off the pitch and into a classroom. There's obviously that side of it, but there's also the side where they're thinking about psychological skills when they're in a drinks break or during a session, because it is a really vital football skill and it shouldn't be spoken about in any different way than, you know, a cutback or a different type of shot or whatever it is. Confidence as a skill should work in exactly the same way. And then we've got our professional development phase. So you might think it gets a little bit more serious, but the boys absolutely still like having loads of fun and competing against each other and doing silly things and things like that as well. And sometimes that's probably the best way to actually engage them in this kind of thing. So like I said, lots of different player one-to-ones. So we have proactive things, so things that might have been picked up from their profiles or things that players have wanted to work on. So we're going to work on it together. But there might be the reactive things as well. So something might have happened on a Saturday that we feel like probably becomes quite an important thing for us to work on together as well. We have unit-specific and position-specific workshops and different work together. Position-specific IDP targets. So every player has their own individual development plan, and we come into that from a position-specific perspective. So we can connect our targets to what the player's technical and tactical targets are. So as you can see already, we're becoming a lot more football focused or a lot more performance focused within the professional development phase. We have our separate framework and curriculum. So within the professional development phase, we don't work with the 5 C's, not because it's not applicable, but because we don't need to be as child friendly anymore. So we go into a little bit more understanding the sense of self and that kind of thing. And then we engage in performance profiling too. So I appreciate already I've said a lot of words. So really keen to get your reflections so far. So whether that be on anything that I've said, whether that be that you can really see any similarities with your own work. Do you have any reflections on what you're doing at the moment that is similar, or any reflections on the different demands that players are placed under? So please feel free to use the chat box.
I think Keith's got a question you might want to ask over the mic.
Okay.
In the chat.
Okay. I was just wondering what age or ages would you think about introducing particular techniques like imagery, decision making, positive self-talk, those sort of things?
So within the youth development phase, we might touch on those things a little bit more. So from 12s upwards, but there's definitely been instances where we've spoken about that kind of concept, but used it in a slightly different way with individual foundation phase players. So for example, if a under 9 is really struggling with something in particular, we might do a really child friendly or dialed down version of imagery with them on the side of the pitch or that kind of thing. But when it comes to actually teaching them as strategies that they can use going forward, it would definitely be towards your 13s, 14s and upwards kind of age.
Oh, thanks very much.
No problem. Amelia, I can't actually see the chat box if there's any more reflections or questions in there.
So I don't think there's anything in the chat, but David has got a question as well.
I've got one question, because more and more athletes are becoming younger and younger, and we've got, national athletes, sometimes even international athletes,
Yeah.
even just before they hit the age of 25, which we know where our brain kind of almost tops out in terms of its psychological development.
Yeah.
Now, how would you deal with an athlete that is international and is on the verge of becoming a professional athlete, where they get paid to do the sport, and with payment there becomes demands, contracts, and God knows what type of deals, almost with the devil, if you would like.
Yeah.
How would you kind of deal with that if the athlete was still having a really good relationship with the social peers, so like their friends, the parents, and so on, but within the contract, like in many different contracts, it's saying that they're going to be away for months and months away from that?
Yeah. I mean, that's a hard one, and I think that's something that a lot of our players go through, because as soon as they turn 17, they're then signing professional contracts, and that is, I guess, the responsibility of them going forward. It's still really important that they have that social support around them, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we would actually encourage our boys to stay in tune with, because the more professional you become, sometimes the lonelier it gets. So having that support system around you is absolutely vital. But what we try and do is make sure our program is extensive enough that they're building that resilience to be able to cope with that demand and cope with that pressure. Naturally, there's a lot of things that will happen that are out of our control and out of their control when it comes to the pressures of social media, the financial pressures, and that kind of thing. So that's when we then have to link closely with our player care department, who give the boys all the education they might need when it comes to making sure they're financing themselves correctly, or making sure that they're, I guess, connecting with the right people and those people that would support around them too. But all we can do here is make sure that our program allows our players to be able to have those skills to go. Like you said, we get a lot of 16, 17-year-olds that are then put with the first team. And obviously that's men's football, and it's a totally different environment. So how on earth can a 16-year-old with a 16-year-old brain be able to cope with those demands? But it's our job to be as proactive as possible, to build a program around them, to make sure they're resilient enough to cope with that, but also be there ready for the reactive support when that's necessary too.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Perfect. There's a few more, obviously, raising hands. So Imogen, I'll pass over to you.
Hi, how are you?
Hi,
really
okay.
enjoyed that. Yeah, I really enjoyed that talk as always. A couple of questions. Firstly, I'm just always interested to kind of understand how player one-to-ones relate to, I guess, the broader psychological aim at Aston Villa, and perhaps those areas of focus within each stage of development. And I guess, what do you do when someone comes to you on a one-to-one basis with an issue or concern that's perhaps really outside of your sort of, I guess, your psychological approach with that particular age group or something like that? That would just be something I'm interested about.
Yeah, so I would say my number one focus is always the player. So if they want to come and speak to me about something that is nothing to do with the curriculum, nothing to do with anything we've spoken before, that will always be my number one priority, and they would always be allowed to do so. So that would be what I would phrase as the reactive work. So players, every single player in this building can come and speak to me about absolutely anything they want to. Even if it's a performance related thing and it's just something that they want to work on, then I will absolutely not say no to that either, because I think them having control over their own psychological development is absolutely fantastic in my opinion. The rest of the one-to-ones would be guided by our curriculum. It would also be guided by what pops up for them within our performance profiling, as well as what is on their individual development plans, which is normally, the targets on there are normally created between the player, the coach, and myself. So we try and stay as proactive as possible and stay on the curriculum as much as we can, because we've built the curriculum in a way to try and give them all the skills that we feel they will need. But absolutely, if a player wants to work on something in particular, they absolutely can. Cool. So what I'll do is I'll just carry on into the next bit as well, as I imagine there's loads of different questions. So just in case I'm going to answer them in the next bit. So apologies if you do have your hand up, you can absolutely go first when we ask a few more questions. So I've spoken through how we work through the player individually. So now I want to outline a little bit on how we would then work through staff and how we would then work through the environment. So as I mentioned, when you've got 2 psychologists in a building in which you have hundreds of players, you can't be that one-to-one psychologist for every single person. And I think that was probably my biggest reflection point when I first started working here, and probably what caught me by surprise the most. Just because what I imagined life as a sports psychologist would be very one-to-one focused. And yes, you can do that with your priority players, but sometimes you can't necessarily do that with every single player within the building. So what we try and do is we have our coach development program. And the way that we run it here is we have a curriculum of helping coaches understand how players learn, how players develop, how they interact, and how they thrive. So for example, on an educational basis, if I'm talking about how players learn, I might talk about learning cycles or styles of learning for coaches. How players develop, I might be thinking about attachment theory or different psychological theories like that. How they interact, so it might be motivational interviewing to help coaches build closer relationships. It might be education on the coach-athlete relationship, that kind of thing. And then how players thrive. So we might be talking a little bit more about performance under pressure and how we can make sure that, a little bit like the question earlier, how we can introduce things like imagery, like self-talk, to really ensure that players are getting the best out of their performance on a game day. So within our coach development program, we have opportunities for observation. So I'll be out there on the side of the pitch, observing the coaches and giving them feedback on how they're building psychological skills within their program. So for our under 9s to under 16s coaches, that might be framed around the 5 Cs. So how are they using their skills to build 5C skills within their training sessions? So it might be that they've got a training session based around shooting and attacking. So we might build confidence into that. So how can we create different competitions and things like that to build confidence skills? So all of a sudden you've got a training session on a Tuesday evening that is getting them much better at shooting, and it's improving their technical ability, but it's also building their confidence skills alongside that. We have informal and formal feedback opportunities. We work with what's called the progress model. So as I mentioned, for 9s to 16s, we use the 5 Cs framework. The progress model is alongside the 5 Cs, and it's a really great way to be able to make sure that you can build psychology into your training sessions. So if you are a coach or if you're a psychologist, I would absolutely urge you to look into that. And then we have coach-specific CPD sessions, so educational sessions that we frame around how players learn, develop, interact, and how they thrive as well. So we have quite an extensive coach development program, which is great. And luckily, all of the coaches at Aston Villa are really on board with it. So then we have all staff CPD. So different topics that we might think would be useful to every single person in this building. So whether that be coaches, whether that be analysis staff, it might be the transport team who transport our players to and from the academy building, that kind of thing. And all staff would have access to any online resources that we build as well. Multidisciplinary team meetings. So weekly meetings with the MDT, and we find this really useful to be able to, of course, talk about the logistics within the week. So if anyone has any experience, life within academy football moves extremely quickly. So it's really important to make sure that there's real clarity on the logistics. But also it's our opportunity to sit down and speak about our individual player needs as well. So we've got squad sizes of between 15 and 20 boys. So those weekly meetings are a really important way to make sure each staff might have a couple of bullseye players for the week to make sure that all of our players get as much individual attention as possible. It's also a great opportunity for MDT members to raise any concerns that they might have. And then we've got referrals with staff as well. So referrals from the MDT team that I just mentioned, but we've also got referrals into our academy and referrals out. So what I might mean by a referral in is that someone refers a player to me. They might have a performance-related issue. They might have a subclinical issue that I can deal with. Or we also might refer to the doc that we've got full-time here as well. When it comes to referral out, it might be that we've decided that this probably isn't a subclinical issue, might be more on the clinical border. So then we reach out to the PFA or a clinical psychologist to help us support that player. So a really key part of our coach development program and our working through staff is making sure that we enhance the coach-athlete relationship as much as we can. So what we find here is that we're trying to create professional footballers, right? But the biggest thing we want to do is build relationships from human being to human being. And if we can build those relationships, performance comes along with that. We find that our players perform better for a coach if they have a really great and really close understanding and relationship with that coach. So this is one of our key priorities. So I've put the references at the bottom left as well. Definitely look into Sophia Jowett's work and Daniel Rind. Really great concepts about coach development and how coaches build really close relationships with athletes. So the education and what we try and give to our coaches is the information about the theory of the coach-athlete relationship or how they can build really close relationships. So trying to build the closeness, trying to build the commitment and the complementarity between player and coach. And we also use what they call the compass model. So supporting with conflict management, with openness or motivation, different things like that. So we try and across the whole academy, we really try and make things as evidence-based as possible. And this is a great way for us to do that. So it's often a piece that we get coaches to reflect on themselves, but it's often a piece that we try and educate coaches around as much as possible to be able to support them to build those really close relationships with each of their players. As you can imagine, this gets harder the more towards the business end that you get. Coaches then become barriers in some players' eyes to their success, because we're getting closer to release, or we're getting closer to the first team. So having this relationship becomes more and more important as you go through the ranks. So then finally, working through the environment as well. So we've spoken about the player directly. We've spoken about working through the staff that work here. But what about the whole environment around each of these players? So as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, especially with the young players, one of the biggest stakeholders for those young players is the parent. Now, working with the parent is so vital because they are with us 20% of their time, which means 80% of their time they're at home listening to the key things that are being told to them from their parent. A parent is every single child's absolute role model. So how can we make sure that the parents are delivering the same kind of messages that we would want to deliver to our players as well? So we have what we call an MDT parent program, in which we bring parents in so they can really experience what their young children are experiencing with us. and give the parents the opportunity to come and see what the players do, give the players the opportunity to show off and explain to their parents, you know, what they've been doing, what they've learned, different things like that. But also that, you know, the biggest thing for us is to build a relationship with the parent ourselves, but also make sure that the parents are really aware of the key messages that we're trying to share to their son, so that they can continue to share those while they're at home as well. Alongside this, because that's with the multidisciplinary team, we try and have specific psychology workshops too. So making sure that the parents are getting the key messages that we feel are really important. So we try and aim these workshops either for the parent to then help the player, or for the parent to help themselves. So a lot of the time we forget that the parent is along this journey as with all of the players. You know, the players don't get here themselves. The parents are stood out there in the rain, going through all the emotions that the players go through too. So for example, on the right-hand side, a couple of examples of the workshops that we might do with players or parents. So outlining the rocky road that is academy football. You know, it's not going to be a complete linear line. It's not going to be fun and quick and enjoyable and always positive or something like that. It's not always going to be going upwards. There's going to be dips, there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, there's going to be rocky roads. So really outlining that to parents, but ensuring that we're then giving them the tools so they know how to help players through those dips, or they know where to come for support through those moments too. But then we've also outlined what a perfect game day parent might look like. So again, anyone on the call with experience of academy football might know how intense it can get for young players. And sometimes a lot of that intensity comes from their parent. There's a lot of pressure. So we speak to our players and we almost get them to deliver what they think a perfect parent on game day might look like. So it might be shouting support from the sidelines, it might be being quiet, it might just be being there for a hug at the end of the game, or being there to speak about all the positives at the end of the game. We then deliver this back to the parents. So what we're really keen on doing is absolutely not telling parents how to parent, because I'm not a parent, our other psychologist isn't a parent, and I can't even imagine how naive that would come across. But what we can do is help the conversation between parent and player and make sure the parents are really listening to the key messages that players might have on that. Because believe me, they might be 9 years old, but they definitely have some really important opinions that they would like to share with you. We then offer parent 2-to-1s, so with parent, with child, and with us, or plenty of drop-in sessions as well. So we try and make sure that we don't exclude the parents within the academy journey, because we can't forget that they're just such a massive part of this journey, especially, you know, yes, they might then take a little bit of a backseat when players come into us full time. So if they're 17 and living with host families, the parents might have a little bit less contact. But before then, the parents are such a vital stakeholder within the journey that it's vital for us to really connect with them. In and around the academy building, so posters, visuals, infographics aimed at different stakeholders. So infographics for parents, infographics for staff, for agents, for scouts, you know, whoever it might be in and around the building. Support with entry and exit. So the hardest thing that we do in this job is dealing with retain and release decisions. It's never nice when a player we've had for so long leaves us, but it's our duty to make sure that they're fully supported when they do. So that side of things probably sits a little bit more with player care, but we make sure that we have really close links with them to make sure that every player is psychologically supported through that moment in their life. But then we've got the really exciting bits of the entry to us as well. So whether they come to us at the start of their journey at under-9s, or whether they join us at a later stage within the under-16s, or they're signed at PDP, we try and make sure that we're giving education to recruitment and to scouts. So what kind of psychological skills could they be looking for? What would an Aston Villa player look like when we're scouting them? But also heavily involved in player inductions as well. So they get brought up to speed with their psychological curriculum, and we can kind of really see what kind of psych support they might have been given before, so then we can really plan what they might need as a bit of a priority going forwards. And then we have mental health as well. So we talk a lot about performance, and we can't forget the mental health and well-being side of performance. So we all know that if you're feeling really mentally unwell, that's naturally going to affect your performance too. So it's so important that we make sure our players are fully supported from a well-being perspective and a performance perspective. So again, that's referrals both in our academy but out of our academy if needed for clinical issues too. So one of the biggest things that we do, especially from a staff-facing perspective, is supporting the development of a culture. So the word culture gets thrown around constantly, and I have no doubt it will mean something different to every single person on this call. And you know, I'm not going to give you a definition of what it is, but I'm going to outline a little bit of what we will do or what we have been doing in the academy to kind of really build the sense of culture that we would like. I thought I'd include a lovely picture on the right-hand side of a couple of our staff that won our little in-house tournament. It wasn't football because surprisingly, there's actually more staff within the academy that don't play football than there are. I think that was like little bits of volleyball, cricket, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to creating a culture, these are the 4 kind of steps that we've decided to go through. So the first step for us is outlining what we feel our core values are. So what does it mean to be involved with Aston Villa, no matter what level that is, no matter whether you're a cleaner, no matter whether you're the academy manager, whether you're staff, whether you're player, whether you're parent, what are the core values of our academy? We then need to clarify what that actually means. So we've got the overall core values, but then, okay, what does that mean within the psychology department? What do those behaviours of the psychology department look like that emphasise those academy values? What does that look like within the sports science department? What does that look like within the coaching department? So that's when we really kind of, yes, we've got our core values, but then we're starting to look at what the behaviours of that are like. So then we can hold each other a little bit more accountable because we actually know what we're looking for from a culture. We then need to filter it down into everything we do and everybody in the building. So we'll filter it down into each of our squads. So what do those core values look like, and what are the behaviours within our under 10s? What does it look like within our under 15s or our under 21s? What does it look like for our parents to uphold those academy values as well? So naturally, it's going to look really different for every single one of those groups, but they're still really influencing what we would call the wider culture. And then it's about the action. So we've got the values, we've got the behaviours, but how do we actually do that? What are we actually doing on a day-to-day basis to live and to breathe what our academy culture is? And how do we hold each and every single person within that very accountable to each of their actions? So that's what we're trying to do to really develop that sense of culture within our building. So a little bit more of a time for reflection before I then head into the challenges and the key learning points for me. What I'm going to do though is we probably won't open it up to questions and taking yourself off the mic because we're probably only 5 minutes away from finishing. But do try and use the chat box if that's okay. So just reflect on what I've spoken about. So about working through the athlete, the staff, and the environment. So think about your current practice right now. So how do you make sure that you try and influence all of those different things? Or do you actually use a different approach, and why do you use that? So whether you're a psychologist, whether you're a coach, you know, whatever you are, how do you try and practice, and what is your approach? So any reflections on that in the chat box would be great.
And as I've put in the oh, my camera goes weird. I've put in the chat, there are quite a lot of questions in there. If we don't get around to all those questions later on, I will email those so everyone can have their questions answered.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on any reflections. There aren't any at the moment, but I'll give it a couple.
It's all right. Quiet reflection is okay. Maybe people don't want to share it. That's all right.
It's at that point in the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got the graveyard shift, haven't I, really?
That's all right.
So
As I say, is reflection.
Just to
Oh,
reflect. Oh, mute.
Oh.
Can you hear me? Yeah, yeah.
yes.
Just a reflection, Emma. A great job you've got there, and I just wondered how you managed to balance those three areas of direct work and staff work and environment, because it's a huge job, and you've got one other colleague there, haven't you? You've got two
Yeah.
psychologists. It's a huge job, and it's in your early career, so it's
Yeah.
amazing. You know what you've done is incredible. All the parent work, and so and the culture. It sounds great. How do you balance it all and manage it all? That's a bit of just reflection.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'd be absolutely lying if I said I did it well every time, because I absolutely don't. And honestly, I think it's a needs must kind of scenario, because if you didn't have that balance and if you didn't focus on the staff and the environment, you would honestly be affecting 2 or 3 players a week. And when you've got so many players, it's just absolutely impossible. So don't get me wrong, we get it wrong all the time, and we have certain weeks in which we've just focused more on individual players and that kind of thing. But making sure that me and the other member of staff here are reflecting together on a regular basis helps us kind of stay on track a little bit more.
Sure. And do you get support for that and supervision yourself? Because it's a stressful job, really, in some ways, isn't it?
It is. I definitely think the good outweighs the bad. But I am line managed by the academy manager. And naturally, I guess it's a really interesting concept within academy football that your client is every single player, but your main client is the academy manager, because that's who kind of brings you in. So we're very much directed in the way by him as well. So it's a nice balance of getting that clear direction, which kind of keeps you on that straight and narrow, but then also balancing your own philosophy and that kind of thing, because naturally, if a player comes to me with a priority, they're then going to very quickly become my priority. So there's constant waves of doing a great job at balancing and then not doing a great job. But making sure that we're just reflecting on that on a regular basis is a really great way to keep us on track. Cool. So I'll leave everyone's questions now to the end. But what I wanted to leave you guys with were what my challenges and key learning points have been, but also then what my top tips would be too. So like I've tried to outline, get it wrong all the time. And that's absolutely fine. The good thing about academy football is things move so quickly that you don't have time to dwell on anything that's gone wrong anyway, because you're already on the next thing. So one of the biggest challenges for me going into this environment was the initial coach buy-in. So naturally, and really lucky here, that the majority of coaches buy into the whole side of psychology straight away. So it's something that coaches now have to do within different coaching badges. So it's a very modern thing, but something that lots and lots of coaches are really getting on board with. Naturally, you're going to have some coaches that are a little bit less into it than others. So it's a really nice challenge to be able to find different ways to sell psychology to that coach, or different ways of talking about it and different ways of kind of encouraging them to include psychology. So we've spoken about coaches having to build really strong relationships with players. When you go into a building as a psychologist, the first thing that you have to do is build really strong relationships, because at the end of the day, you're then asking people to trust you and do something that you want to do within their sessions. So you have to have those relationships and really be able to help yourself get that coach buy-in to begin with. Changing the language is a really interesting point that I don't think I'd really thought of before I came into academy football. So naturally, a psychology session that we do with the under-9s is going to look very different to a psychology session that we do with the under-21s. which is also going to be different to what we talk about within elite player meetings, within all of the academy staff, or with the first team staff and people like that. But we're actually talking about psychology in every single one of them. But I need to completely change the language that I'm using to be suited to the audience that I have. So how can I sell psychology in every single one of those scenarios, but do it in a way that's really important or really targeted to that specific audience? So changing the language and being able to be that flexible is a really, really useful skill for a psychologist or a coach to have. One of the challenges, and continues to be a challenge, is that imposter syndrome. So that level of self-doubt, or that feeling that you don't quite belong. Not to scare anyone on the call, but it never leaves you. But I think the thing that you get used to is the fact that it is absolutely okay to be there. So I actually enjoy the feeling of the imposter syndrome now, because it makes me turn into someone slightly differently, and it makes me work harder, or it makes me think, okay, if I've got this feeling, what am I doing to make me have that feeling? Or what can I be doing to make me feel a little bit more accepted? Or what am I letting myself think and feel, in which that's actually really not being very helpful to me at all? So you actually end up being your own psychologist at the end of the day. But I think that's a really, really healthy thing to have. So the key learning point is that you will absolutely have imposter syndrome, but that's absolutely fine. And it's actually a really quite useful thing to have as you go along as well. The level of resource. So we've mentioned the fact that we have 2 psychologists here, but in academy football, that's actually pretty good. So it's thinking about how you adapt and how you make sure that the level of psychology that you deliver is still the level that you want, but how can you make sure that you're finding that right balance that Martin mentioned when your level of resource is realistically going to be pretty low. And then again, this, as if Stuart, is absolutely reading my mind, the balance of proactive and reactive stuff too. So we try and be as proactive as possible and have our curriculum, and a little bit like Imogen said too, have your curriculum, try and make sure that players are working towards the things that you want to work towards, but also having plenty of time to support players through those reactive moments too. And every single player, no matter what age they are within academy football, are going to go through something that you're going to need to support them with. So summary and top tips, and I can see I've got 3 minutes left, so my timing has not been too bad at all. So psychology within academy football goes far beyond one-to-one consultations. And that was probably the biggest surprise for me coming into this building, that you just have to be a lot more flexible, and you have to think about how you can make sure every single player has a psychological return from this place, not just the 1 or 2 that you would give one-to-one support to. It's vital to understand who the key stakeholders are for each player. So it might be a better use of your time to work through the parent, or to work through academy manager, to work through agent, to work through scout. So it's so important to think about who actually might be more influential for that player. Do they have a really great relationship with the physio? So is it actually more beneficial for you to work through the physio rather than the player themselves? Getting the foundation right supports psychological development across the whole academy. So that's why we work with our young players. So if we work with our under 9s and they stay with us until under 18, that's a hell of a lot of time that they're learning about psychological skills and growing up to know that psychology is absolutely fine to seek support. So you're completely breaking that stigma that might come along with that. And then you might not always be the psychologist. So I guess this is a 2-parter. So you might not always be the psychologist, because sometimes you are the water boy, or you're the assistant coach, or you're the assistant physio, or whatever you might be. But you also might not be the best person to be the psychologist at that time either. So sometimes you need to work through the coach, because they're the one with the best relationship with the player. Sometimes you need to work with the parent, because that's who the player's closest to. Or you might need to work with the physio during their long-term injury, because that's who's going to have the most contact time with that player. So my top tips would be get fully involved with absolutely everything. So that self-doubt is going to come, but if you let that take over, then you are never, ever going to improve or be able to really get involved and feel confident within that environment. Speak to all of the experts. So when you go into football, what you learn very quickly is that you are not the expert on football. There'll be a coaching expert, there'll be a medical expert, there'll be a nutritional expert. So getting to speak to all of those very intelligent people is actually vital for your own development. Embrace all the challenges. So they're not going to feel good in the moment, but 2 years down the line, you will absolutely reflect on them and feel like you are now a better person because of those things. Trust yourself. So that's something that I'm still going through as a head of department. I then don't have anyone to say, oh, do you think this idea is okay? Sometimes you absolutely just have to trust it, give it a go, reflect on it and see if it has worked or change it if it hasn't. And then be flexible as well. So academy football changes constantly. And even if it's not academy football that you're going to go into, if you're coaching in rugby, if you're a psychologist in hockey, whatever it might be, elite sport requires lots of flexibility. So be ready to make changes at the very last minute and just go with the flow. Okay, so that is my waffle that I'm not going to lie, Amelia, I have absolutely nailed on the dot in 50
You have,
minutes.
apart from the fact there's loads of questions, but I'll ask a couple and then everyone else's I will send over via email if that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
As we'll wrap up, we'll try and end up on 4 on the dot, but I waffle as well, so it's probably me. So yeah, just a couple of questions and I'm going to just go in order. So from Ian,
sharing my screen, sorry.
oh, it's up to you, I don't mind. As I say, from Ian, who's asked, what mental health support do you provide?
So mental health within academy football sits slightly more within player care than it does with us. So we make sure that all staff and all players are very aware of the different things that they might need to look for. So mental health signs of any disorders or anything like that that might be going wrong with players. We make sure that we celebrate all the mental health weeks and the different things like that. When it comes to referrals or one-to-one support, so any player can come to us at any time for one-to-one mental health support. We have a full-time academy doctor, so if I'm working with a player and I feel like it might be more of a clinical issue than a subclinical issue, it might then be referral to the doctor, or if I think that it's something that even our doctor's not really going to be able to deal with, I would refer straight out to the PFA. What we're really conscious of is how many people I've just described and how many times a player might have to repeat their story. So we have an online system. So we make sure that we complete notes and everything on there so our players don't have to repeat the same thing to loads of different people. And if one person has been in charge of that case, then that is the person that will take it all the way from onset to referral.
Perfect. I hope that has answered the question very well. It's a very good answer. And then the last one from Elena or Lena, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong, who said, thanks, Emma, this was really insightful. I was wondering how you deal with players joining the academy later, e.g. in the under-16s, especially regarding the attributes and skills targeted in the younger age groups.
Yep, so when our under-16s come in, we naturally have to think, okay, well, hopefully they've had a really insightful program within another academy. And if they have come from another category 1 academy, we can normally guess that they probably have had a similar program or at least some kind of psychological support. The difficulty comes when they come and they've had very little psychological support. So for example, we've had players come into us at a later stage and they're from Scotland, or they're from the lowest of the UK or something like that, where the support just hasn't been as extensive as it is here. So what we try and do is we try and then, especially at the older age group, try and prioritize them from a one-to-one level. So they might become what we would call our priority players. So they might get a little bit more one-to-one support to make sure that we can then be there to support with any reactive things that they might come across. What we find sometimes is that when a player comes in, they don't really want to connect with psychological support just because it's something that they've never experienced before. And that's something that we won't fight. So if a player doesn't want to connect with us on a one-to-one level, that's absolutely fine. They'll still get the education through group workshops and things like that. But slowly, we try and drip feed in that information, and normally they slowly become a little bit more inclined to come and seek psychology support.
Perfect. And again, I hope that's answered the question. Obviously, for anyone else who has asked a question in the chat, I have jotted it down, so it will be answered at some point. If there are any other questions, feel free to email me and I will pass them on to Emma as well. But thank you very much. It was absolutely brilliant to have you. It was super interesting. I think gave a really nice overview of what it is like to be head of performance psychology at a Premier League academy. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for giving up your time. And I hope the season went well.
It did, in fairness, it did, which is good. Good way to finish.
Good. That's good. Fab. Thank you very much. So, just to finish us off, I'm just going to share my screen once again. The last time, hopefully I can whiz through this in about 5 minutes and then we'll be free to go. It's just a bit slow for me. So, like I've mentioned at lunchtime, for people who were here around lunchtime, your opinion is really important to us for future events. It was also a way to get your certificate if you have said that you require one. Please scan the QR code either on here now, or you can use the link. I will also send this out to via email, probably tomorrow or Monday at the latest, so it gives you enough time to complete. It doesn't take any longer than, I'd say, 5 minutes, and the average time I've seen is about 6. And the deadline to complete this is midnight on Monday, the 10th of June. Obviously, this will be super helpful for next year and events beyond there. It's also important to the funders, especially if we're hopefully trying to get the university funding it in the next few years. So I will send this out, so don't worry if you don't catch it right now. The presentation recording, so everything has been recorded today. So well, I hope they've all been recorded very well. These will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So again, the link is there, and I think I've sent in quite a lot of emails as well. Please give about 7 to 10 working days for these to be uploaded. It might take a little bit of time to download and upload them to YouTube, especially if they are the longer talks. You'll be notified by email from me when they are available to watch. Not all of them might be up there, but when the majority are, I will probably send an email. If there's anything that you're waiting on in particular, then please let us know. And for anyone who either hasn't been able to join us in the morning or anything like that. And then that's pretty much it from us. I'm going to pass back to Tracy just to round off, see if there's anything that I've missed. But from me, thank you very much for attending. This is actually my last event of 4 years, which is crazy. I joined as a little website editor in 2021, and now I'm here wrapping up for the whole day. But yes, thank you so much for attending. We'll stick around for a few minutes if there's any questions, but I will pass back to Tracy just for some closing remarks.
So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for the people who have stayed up late or got up early to come along and stay for as much of the day as possible. Thank you to all of our speakers. It's been great to hear, and actually been really nice to sit back and listen, even though I've been chairing sessions, because Amelia has done all the hard work, and actually I'm so sad that this will be her last year. She'll be graduating and moving on. So I won't cry, but it means I'm going to have to do lots of work. But Amelia, thank you so much for all of your hard work. There will be a space coming up to try and replace the wonderful work that you've done. So if anyone wants to get in contact, but I also want to say thanks to the team. So the steering group has been fantastic in supporting. So that's to Amelia, Kate, Grace, Laurie, Louie, Liam, Millie, Andrew, Rufus, Parry, Alice, and then Zoe, yep. And who else have I got? Anyone?
I think that's about it. Sorry if we've missed anyone.
Dan, Adam, Max is not
is
here. So the team behind the scenes has worked really hard, and that's why it'd be great to get the evaluation so that we can continue to get funding. It's a free event. We do pay our speakers because that's important for sports psychology. So please fill out the evaluation so we can continue this event. And also thank you to the master students who also delivered. I know it could be quite daunting to deliver to lots of people, but everyone did well. So thanks again. We'll see everyone next year. Maybe Amelia will be back as a attendee next year rather than having to do all the work. So thanks again, everyone, and yeah, see you all next year or at any events that we've got coming up. In September, we do have an event in Newcastle, and we'll send out that information. But I think that'd be far for people to travel from Australia, New Zealand, and Venezuela, and Uruguay, and all that.
Uruguay.
So have a wonderful day, and thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
Right, thanks, Amelia, and
Thank
everyone.
you. Brilliant.
Cheers.